Keir Starmer has refused to impose a cap on net migration, even as the UK faces an unprecedented population boom. The Office for National Statistics, ONS, has just revealed shocking figures. The UK's population is on course to hit 72.5 million by 2032. That's nearly 5 million more people in just 10 years, and the driving force behind it, mass migration. Despite these staggering numbers, Starmer has flat out refused to introduce a cap, choosing instead to push vague promises of a comprehensive plan. But don't take my word for it. Let's go straight to the data. Here's a clip from the ONS outlining the sheer scale of the population explosion set to hit Britain.
Putting it crudely, that's 10 million additional foreign people moving to Britain in this next decade. No hospitals, no schools, not enough homes. The country's going to grind to a halt.
It's incredibly difficult, isn't it? Because we know that the government doesn't have much money. We know that these huge tax rises to try to get money. We know that they're trying to get growth. That's what they want to talk about today. But growth takes time. We've had precious little of it, really, since the financial crisis. We need it to get more money into the economy, to get more money for public services. But we see from these figures that if these are correct, we're going to need vastly more resources to fund the school places, the hospitals, the houses, and it's not clear at the moment where that money's going to come from.
These figures are only correct if we do nothing to change our visa system. And I think it's widely acknowledged now that the system set up under Boris Johnson, which had a salary threshold far, far too low, that had all these exceptions for so-called shortage worker schemes that allowed millions of students in, I think most people accept that that is broken. The question is, what will Labour do about it? Will they persist in raising the thresholds? Will they follow the advice of many think tanks, which is to set a hard cap on the number of visas? Or do you think they'll just look at these figures and think, well, there's nothing we can do about it?
Well, of course, Robert Jenrick was pledging to get net migration down to the tens of thousands. Kemi Badenoch said it's going to come down. The government has said it's going to come down. But look, if it's already at sort of 700,000 a year, that shouldn't be too difficult. The question is, how many do you get it down to? And the problem is that ultimately the Home Office is always battling to get net migration down. But meanwhile, the Treasury, the Education Department, and so on and so forth are thinking, well, look, more workers, more money in the economy, that's growth. And often they measure growth as the economy growing, but it isn't really at the moment, rather than what perhaps is more pertinent to all of us, which is GDP per head. Are we feeling better off? If the economy is growing, but we've got hundreds of thousands more people in the country, ultimately, many of us may not feel it at all. In fact, we may feel we're worse off. We can't get those doctor's appointments and can't get our kids into the school that we want to.
These aren't speculative predictions. This is official government data confirming that the UK is heading into uncharted demographic territory. But rather than taking decisive action, Starmer's government is dodging the issue, claiming that a cap wouldn't work. Instead, Labour is promising yet another comprehensive plan, a phrase that has become synonymous with inaction and empty rhetoric. A spokesman for the Prime Minister acknowledged that the net migration figures are staggeringly high, but rather than implementing immediate measures, he said, "We're going to publish a white paper to set out a comprehensive plan to end these staggeringly high migration numbers." This should set off alarm bells. We've seen it all before, politicians promising strategies, reports and committees while the numbers spiral out of control. If past experience tells us anything, it's that these so-called comprehensive plans never lead to real action. And why should anyone believe Labour on this? Time and time again, when previous governments attempted to introduce migration caps, Labour politicians actively opposed them. Now, Starmer claims caps don't work, but is it that they don't work, or that Labour never wanted them to work in the first place? Public outrage is already growing. Conservative Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp has called the projection shocking and unacceptable, demanding a hard, binding legal cap on the number of visas issued each year. Across the country, people are asking, how will Britain cope with this explosion in population when public services are already under strain? Why is Starmer refusing to act, even when the ONS data confirms that migration is the main driver of this increase? Is Labour deliberately ignoring public concerns in favour of an open-door policy? The ONS projections confirm that natural population change, births versus deaths, is projected to be around zero. This means that without migration, the UK's population wouldn't be seeing anything close to this surge. Yet rather than addressing this issue head-on, Labour is attempting to shift the national conversation elsewhere. While this immigration crisis unfolds, they're pushing a major intervention in the car market, one that could cost taxpayers millions. Chancellor Rachel Reeves is reportedly considering government-backed subsidies for electric vehicles EVs. According to the Financial Times, Labour is exploring options to guarantee consumer loans for EV purchases. This raises serious concerns. On the one hand, the government refuses to take strong action on migration, claiming it's too complex to solve quickly. But on the other hand, when it comes to pushing the green agenda, they are more than willing to use taxpayer money to intervene in the market. The auto industry is already struggling to meet Labour's zero-emission vehicle (ZEV) mandate, which requires 28% of all new car sales to be electric by the end of this year. Manufacturers who fail to meet the targets face fines of up to £15,000 per non-compliant car. Many in the industry have warned that this is unrealistic and damaging to the economy, yet Labour is doubling down on this plan. Now, in an attempt to ease the financial burden, the government is considering underwriting private sector loans to bring down monthly payments for electric vehicles. Essentially, this would mean forcing taxpayers to foot the bill for Labour's green agenda, whether they agree with it or not. Critics are warning that this could lead to higher taxes, greater financial strain on consumers, and an artificial distortion of the car market. If demand for electric vehicles isn't naturally high enough to meet government-imposed quotas, then perhaps the issue isn't a lack of government subsidies, but rather the public's reluctance to switch under current conditions. Meanwhile, another major controversy is brewing, one that could have huge implications for Britain's global standing. Former WHO Director Carol Sikora is urging the UK to follow Donald Trump's lead and leave the World Health Organization, WHO. Trump has already signed an executive order withdrawing the US from the WHO, citing mismanagement and financial corruption. And yet, instead of reconsidering Britain's involvement, Starmer has committed to pumping an additional £310 million of taxpayer money into the organization. Professor Sikora, who previously worked inside the WHO, has gone public with his concerns. The UK should follow Trump's lead and withdraw from the WHO. I've seen it from the inside. It stinks. No real reform is possible, he warned. And he isn't the only one questioning the UK's financial commitment to the WHO. Trump himself pointed out that China, despite having a far larger population, pays significantly less than the US did before the withdrawal. He called it a rip-off, and now many in the UK are wondering, are we being ripped off too? So, let's take stock of the situation. In just a matter of weeks, the Labour government has refused to cap migration, despite overwhelming evidence that net migration is driving a population explosion, proposed massive taxpayer-backed subsidies for electric vehicles while failing to acknowledge the struggles of the UK car industry, increased funding to the WHO despite growing concerns over financial mismanagement and inefficiency. And all of this comes at a time when millions of British people are struggling with the cost of living, public services are stretched to their limits, and the country faces mounting economic uncertainty. Why is the government prioritising international organisations over British taxpayers? Why are they forcing a green agenda onto the public while ignoring public concerns about migration? And why, despite all the warning signs, is Keir Starmer still refusing to take real action on the biggest issues facing the country? These are the questions the British public deserve answers to, but instead, all we get is more political spin, more empty promises, and more costly interventions that most people never asked for. What do you think? Is Labour failing to control migration? Should the UK leave the WHO? And is Starmer's green agenda putting taxpayers on the hook for policies they never voted for?